Dorothy Arnold lived a secret life. When she went missing, those around her would be left with an unsolvable puzzle. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings of the world, you come to the right place. If you'd like to support the channel, and of course I would appreciate it, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. Let's get started. Dorothy Arnold would depart from her home during the morning hours of December 12, 1910. She told her mother that she was going to head to the store to buy a new evening gown. Her mother would ask to go along with her just to keep her company, but Dorothy said no. She would walk to Fifth Avenue and turn south. A clerk at the Park and Tilford's candy store who sold Arnold some chocolate at 1:45 p.m. said that she seemed to be in good spirits. Overall, she looked happy and totally fine. Dorothy would then head to a bookstore called Brentano's, which was a bookstore on 27th and 5th. There, she bumped into a friend in the store. They would chat for a few minutes before Dorothy left the establishment. She would tell that friend that she was going to go for a walk in Central Park. Dorothy was supposed to meet her mother for lunch at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel that day, but she never kept the appointment. Unfortunately, Dorothy Arnold has never been heard from again. Her family believed that on the day she vanished, she had approximately $25 or $30 in cash. Although Dorothy hadn't returned home and didn't show up to her lunch, her parents weren't initially worried because they thought perhaps she had spent the night with a friend. But when she didn't come home on the second night, her parents became increasingly concerned. Although they didn't initially contact the police because they were afraid of negative publicity. Instead, they would hire private investigators to search for her. You see, Dorothy was from a prominent family of millionaires in 1910. Her father was an established perfume importer, and her family really had a high-ranking place in society. And of course, this was 1910, so that was incredibly important for them. Dorothy would graduate from Bryn Mawr College, and that was in Pennsylvania. She was fluent in several languages, and she wanted to become a writer. When she went missing, she was still living in her family home, which was a mansion on 79th Street in Manhattan. The thing is, no evidence was found of her whereabouts, and when police were informed several months later of her disappearance, their search turned up nothing either. Her father firmly believed that she had been murdered and disposed of in a reservoir in Central Park on that day in December, but nothing was found to support his theory. And although her disappearance was widely publicized and her photograph was published in newspapers all over the US and in Europe, they still had no viable leads to her whereabouts. The investigation would uncover that Dorothy had rented a post office box in the months prior to vanishing, but she did keep the box's existence a secret from her loved ones. It is believed she used the box to keep rejected manuscripts from being found out by her family. So again, I want to note that this is 1910. A lot of women, when they did write, wrote under pen names. Of course, her writing may not have been looked upon as something that she should have been doing. I'm sure her parents wanted her to settle down and get married and have children. Authorities would also uncover another secret. She had been dating an older man. She had been secretly dating George C. Griscom Jr., and he was a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania engineer in his 40s. And Dorothy at the time was only 25 years old. It appears that George was from a wealthy family in Pittsburgh. Authorities would soon uncover that Dorothy spent a week with her boyfriend several months prior to the time she vanished. She had told her family she was going to visit some college friends, but instead went to see her boyfriend. And then, strangely enough, on her way home, she would pawn $500 worth of her jewelry for only $60. It turns out that George was in Florence, Italy in December of 1910. He would participate in this search for Dorothy and stated that when she was found, he would marry her, and he heavily denied any involvement in her disappearance, and would even give her family a letter that she had written him in early 1910. The note stated that one of her short stories had been rejected by the staff of a magazine, and in that letter, Dorothy said she was depressed as a result of this. Authorities would begin to investigate the possibility that perhaps she staged her own disappearance, and they said that maybe she did this because she asked her parents to move out and they wouldn't allow it. Again, this was 1910, so it was pretty customary for a woman to get married first. Of course, many people didn't believe this because months and then years passed and nobody heard from Dorothy, not even George. Many people believe that Dorothy took her own life, while others theorized that she was pregnant and perhaps died from a botched abortion. Some people thought that maybe she even forgot who she was, that she lost her memory, but they would check hospitals and nothing came up. There simply was no evidence whatsoever of what happened to Dorothy. This case is incredibly strange because you would think that somebody would know something. I mean, she was from a very well thought of family. They had a really high ranking place in society. They had a lot of money. For me, I think that on her way to Central Park, or while she was in Central Park, something happened to her and she was likely murdered there. This next case is one of the oldest in the New York Police Department's case files, and the disappearance remains unsolved today. 4-year-old Joseph Rodriguez had been living with his aunt since he was born. They were living in Manhattan, New York, and his birth mother lived within walking distance. On September 6, 1936, Joseph's aunt Pauline would take him to the babysitter. The neighbor would then take Joseph down the street early that afternoon to play with the other children. She would return later, but when she did, Joseph was nowhere to be found. And unfortunately, nobody knows what happened to him. And I'm sure your first thought is, who would take a 4-year-old to play with other children on the street and then just leave them there? But again, this was 1936, and apparently they felt that it was safe enough to do that. Joseph's aunt would receive a telegram on September 12th, 6 days after his disappearance. It stated, "Joseph will be back on Wednesday. Doctor will not let me move him." Although many reports say that the telegram was anonymous, it was in fact signed with a name that Pauline didn't recognize. And the name on that telegram has never been publicly released. And it appears there is no further communication from the writer, and Joseph, unfortunately, never returned to his aunt's home. Chances are that somebody saw this 4-year-old who was very vulnerable on the street and abducted him. Though I lean closer to it being somebody that he knew, perhaps his own mother. There seems to be a lack of information there. Why was he living with his aunt? Was his mother capable? Did she want her child? Again, it could be a stranger abduction because those things happen. Or perhaps one of the kids he was playing with was older and harmed him. Though it seems strange that he just vanished without a trace. But perhaps the babysitter had something to do with it. 22-year-old Ruth Elizabeth Baumgardner would suddenly vanish from her dormitory, and nobody knows what happened to the young woman. Ruth was a senior art major at Ohio Wesleyan University in 1937. She belonged to the Delta Delta Delta, or Tri-Delt sorority, and lived alone in room 319 in Austin Hall on campus. When she was not in college, she would live with her parents in Lakewood, Ohio. It appears that on the evening of her disappearance, she practiced for a singing competition, then studied in her dormitory for a test which was scheduled the following day. Her sorority sisters would say that they last saw her shortly after 11 p.m. on May 4th, 1937. She had her hair up in curls and pins and was behaving normally at the time. And then sometime before midnight, she said goodbye to her friends, and then she would vanish. The Tri-Delts would alert campus authorities about her disappearance at 10:30 p.m. the following day. They soon realized that she hadn't attended any of her classes. The thing is, they would find Ruth's key. It appears that she had left her dormitory room key on the back corner of an Austin Hall staircase between the second and third floors. It's even stranger to me that police thought that she did this on purpose. I mean, I guess she could leave her key on the staircase as a way to get back in. Perhaps she didn't want to put it in her purse or her pocket, so she left it there thinking it was secure. They did find her new red Dodge, and it was parked undisturbed in its regular garage. But the keys were in the ignition. Already, this is sounding suspicious to me. Her key was left on the staircase. Okay, plausible that maybe she left it out there so she could get back into her room later. But leaving her key in the ignition of her new car doesn't sit right with me. I mean, it is plausible. It appears that people back in the 30s, 40s, 50s were quite trusting of everybody. The whole they didn't lock their doors things could be accurate. But again, it's a brand new car. Why would she leave the key in the ignition? That's unsettling. Next, they would check Ruth's room, and they found that it was in perfect order, which apparently was very uncharacteristic of her. Her bed appeared to not have been slept in, her hairpins had been put away, and her pajamas and robe were still hanging in the closet. Her alarm clock had been set for 6 a.m. and apparently had run down, which indicated that perhaps she got up at 6 a.m. on May 5th, left the dormitory without anybody seeing, and disappeared. When she vanished, it's believed that she was carrying an old handbag with no more than $5 in cash, but her watch, sorority pin, and loose change were all left behind in her room. Authorities would believe and theorize that perhaps Ruth had suffered an amnesic episode and wandered away from campus. And many people believe this was true because they quote unquote saw her in Delaware in the days following her disappearance. Although none of those sightings have ever been confirmed. At the time she went missing, Ruth was worried about whether she got enough credit hours to graduate on schedule. Her last letter to her parents stated that she had many things to do and did not know if she was going to do them all. She said that she was, quote, very, very tired. And although they theorized that perhaps this was, a case of, an amnesic disappearance, she was never located, which I guess is pretty unusual for those cases. They would say that perhaps Ruth left on her own, maybe with a boyfriend. And since several of those reported sightings, the unconfirmed ones, placed her with a young man, they thought it was plausible. The thing is, Ruth was happily engaged to her boyfriend in Lakewood, and her friends didn't believe that she was seeing anyone else. And although they didn't find evidence of foul play, a local resident living near the Ohio campus reported hearing screams between 2 and 3 a.m. on May 5th. I think this case is probably a case of foul play, and investigators seem to just miss all the little clues. It seems that Ruth was very worried about her future. That doesn't mean that perhaps she wanted to vanish. I think she was one of those students that was very much going to continue to pursue no matter how long it took. The fact that her room was basically untouched and there were screams at 2 to 3 a.m. makes me wonder if somebody had tried to abduct her. Perhaps somebody had even been following her, noticed where she placed her key on the daily, or somebody close to her knew where she placed her key every single day. Maybe they made a copy. Maybe they just accessed it after she got home. Maybe they were there waiting for her to get home. Who knows? But she left everything behind. And she left her key in the ignition of her car. And although she's never been located or a body's never been located, I very much believe that somebody knows what happened to her. But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel and want to support, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, and I love video suggestions, pop it in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.